Hi, I'm Nathan Schweitzer. I'm a photographer from the greater New Orleans area. I lived in St. Charles Parish for most of my life, and then currently living in a boathouse north of Lake Pontchartrain on Bayou Lacombe.
So how did you get started in photography?
The short answer is I wanted to get into high school events for free, and then I snuck my camera into an Aerosmith concert when I was 15, 16, something like that, and I snuck my way into the front row, and I started talking to this guy because he had a brand new Sony camera, so we were just nerding out for a while, and it turned out that that guy was Joe Perry's son, the guitarist for Aerosmith. So we started talking. I sent him my work after the show, and he had let me come up and shoot by him for the whole show, so I didn't get my equipment banged up. And then my photos ended up getting all over their social media and on Billboard.com, and from that moment forward, I figured it was a pretty sweet gig to get paid to go watch concerts, get free beer and stuff, you know. So a little bit. I had an iPod Touch, as did most kids, and I shot. I have a lot of siblings, so I always took pictures at family events for my family and the kids. And
You still do that now?
yeah, I do as much as I can. I try and have a sort of Linda McCartney-esque approach to photography, and I shoot everything I do, not just the more picturesque moments. So my family's a big part of my life, so I still take pictures of them anytime I get the chance. I do shoot a little bit of film, less and less the more and more expensive it gets. Uh, but for a lot of for portrait shoots, I always try and shoot at least a roll of 120, or I always keep a 35 roll in my car for day-to-day stuff, point and shoot snapshots. But for the most part, for live concerts and anything that is a bit of a bigger production, I'm mostly shooting digital. Oh yeah. So what I equate a lot of the, not to hate on Charlotte, but what I equate the Charlotte cultural scene to is if you're ever driving down Powers Boulevard in Kenner, all the random statues they have in the neutral ground that are for absolutely no reason. That's pretty much the Charlotte culture. It's just also new. It's just kind of infused culture for the sake of there being culture. So they've got some cool bands I work with, a lot of cool guys, but their music is mostly, it's not deeply tied to the geographic location like it is in New Orleans. It's not an effect of growing up there. It's just an effect of listening to music from different places and meeting people from different places. So so when I was 16 or so, I snuck into an Aerosmith concert. Well, they were playing at Jazz Fest, so I bought a ticket. But then I bought a big old lens. You know, I think the rule was like you can't have a lens over 4 inches or whatever. So I snuck it in. Really, just the security guard said, "Go take some good pictures, kid." You know, he let me in with it, and I BS'd my way to the front row, and I met the photographer for Aerosmith, who happened to be Joe Perry, the guitarist for Aerosmith's son. And so we get to talking, and he let me come shoot with him. And I snapped some photos and sent him my work after the show. And he actually was also the social media manager, or whatever the title is. So he posted all my photos on their Instagram, and they ended up getting on Billboard.com via the Instagram. And from that moment forward, I knew that's something I was very interested in, and I love music, so that sort of worked together, and that was my way of participating in the music for someone who's not musically inclined, is photographing the music and hanging out in that scene. So after Aerosmith, I used all the photos from that show to get into other gigs. So I was pretty smart about it, so I shot, you know, like vertical isolated images of each member of the band. So I got photos of Brad Whitford and Tom Hamilton and Joey Kramer and the guys that aren't as recognizable as Joe Perry and Steven Tyler, and I would send them off to venues and managers and bands. And what I started doing in the earliest days is if I saw an act was rolling through a venue like the House of Blues or the Fillmore or whatever, I would reach out to the opening band and offer to shoot for free. And I'd send them those photos of the Aerosmith guys and say, you know, like, I've been doing this forever, but I'm only in town for a couple days. I'm just looking to shoot a show or just BS like that. And then they'd let me come shoot the opening band for free until I had a decent enough portfolio that I could. And then I'd stick around for the main band so I can get photos of more well-known acts. Well, Young Gravy actually was, my friends and I were going to the show, and at that point I had been doing this and hustling the scene and a lot of the venues that touring acts rolled through. So we're standing in line, and then I had brought my cameras with me, fully expecting to have to go put them back in the car. But I went to the box office, and this guy I knew was working in the office, so I just asked him, I was like, dude, what are the odds I can get in to shoot Gravy? And he went and asked his manager, and thankfully the manager was running around so much that he didn't really have time to think about or care if some kid came in and took pictures. So they let me in, and my friends were like, "Where'd he go? Is he missing?" Then they walked in, and I was in the press pit, and they were like, "Hell yeah!" So, well, first of all, I love blues, I love jazz, and I love funk, and you're not getting it anywhere better than New Orleans. And I think the scene's a lot better, having hung out in the Charlotte music scene, and I've been to a few different places to shoot shows in Pittsburgh and Chicago and some in California. It's the hangs are so much better. It's like there's not so much of an air of cool about these guys that you're lesser of a person if you don't know this obscure 1973 record with John McLaughlin and Santana. Everybody's just there to have a good time, and everybody really loves music, and that's more of what it's about. And there's something unique about the New Orleans music scene too, that even though these guys are playing less mainstream music, like funk and jazz and the blues, these are also the world's foremost experts in these areas and just masters of their instruments. So when touring acts need musicians, they come to New Orleans. If they're a solo act, they still need a band to tour live. So a lot of these guys have played with everybody, even in the mainstream. So you get a unique perspective into that scene, and it's a good gateway into the more popular scene if need be. I tell you what, compared to Charlotte, probably it's actually hard for me to gauge like who my competition is exactly. I don't bump into that many local photographers. A lot of them are touring with the act that's rolling through. There's a handful here. There's this guy Stephen Rapport that's settled down in New Orleans, and he's incredible. He's done everything. He's shooting with Leicas, and he's at every show. I mean, he's all over the place. Um, but there is a lot of loyalty to, like, even if I might not be the best at this specific thing, guys will want to hire me just because I'm from around here. We speak a common language. We know a common music, and it's a lot of loyalty to the area, and there's a lot of just appreciation for artistry. Whereas if you're shooting a wedding or something, there's, I think, less free range that the photographer has because he's catering to what the bride wants for the most part. He's got to raise the whites on the photo, and he's got to shoot film or shoot like that film look if that's what she wants. But most bands I show up to that hire me, they don't really tell me anything. We just have a beer, and then it's showtime, and they let me do what I want to do.
That use your own artistic eye.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they let me do what I do and that's the way it should be with photographers, especially, is because you're not hiring me because I'm a photographer. You're not hiring me because I know how to use a camera. There's a million people that know how to use a camera. You're hiring me because I use the camera the way I use a camera. Yeah, I love music. I really do. But believe it or not, the hang is more crucial to me. Like I also think I'm better at portraits and sort of the candid backstage, or if I'm walking around the city with a band. I think I'm better at that stuff than I am at live concerts. Live concerts have just kind of come as an auxiliary activity of hanging out with so many musicians. But yeah, I just love being surrounded by music, and more so than music, more so than just the it's just the musical folks that you encounter. They're just interesting people.
Yeah, very
Always got
interesting people.
stories. Like I said, I love the hang. I love good people. So I think I'm a people photographer. So I'm not great at landscapes. It's also something you think of like landscape photography. I I don't know how guys like Ansel and Chris Burkhardt, I don't know how they make them look so great. Because to me, it's like, okay, well, here's the scene, click a button, and then that's like out of my wheelhouse. Or you know, macro photographers or what have you, even street photography. Well, I do my fair amount of street photography, but there are people that are much better at it than me. I just love people. I really love having conversations with people and getting to know people.
You
And
capture personality.
yeah, I like having. There's a great photo set that Charles Peterson did with Kurt Cobain, and they're portraits, but they're not really portraits. It's not like they were planning on doing portraits. I believe it was after a show, sometime in the early '90s, and Kurt was just back at his hotel room, and Charles walked up to hang with him, and he said, "Do you mind if I shoot some photos while we hang?" And as they were talking, he just shot some photos. In these photos, Kurt's like making these stupid faces because he's just catching them between sentences. He's like, as he's talking and whatever. But I think they're great portraits, and that's very much what I try to do. I try to not make it a big deal. There's not like a photographer here. There's just Nathan, and he's hanging out, and he happens to be taking some pictures. It's another great thing about the New Orleans scene is that everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows all the venues, all the people, all the places, all the food. So
Everybody knows everything.
everybody knows everything. So you've always got a common thread with these people that if I'm hanging out backstage and a trombone player walks in, him and I have got something in common. We've got something in common. We both know this other trumpet player. We both say, "Oh yeah, I was at that gig too. I didn't see you." So there's that really works out. It makes for good conversation, and I've taken to using a lot less intimidating of gear, a lot smaller bodies and smaller lenses and whatever. Because I used to use the big old cameras, and you want to feel more professional, and you get into stuff, and everybody looks at you like you're like this guy's got a big lens, and but now it's like I'd much rather look like an amateur, and I'm just some guy that's hanging out, and I'm snapping pictures as I do it. No, they really don't care. Like, yeah, it's great. Because I do look like a hack sometimes. I don't show up with very professional equipment for the most part. But
Most times you have with a point and shoot, right?
yeah, I have a Fuji X100V, which it's got a price tag on it for if you're going to classify it as a point and shoot, but it really is a point and shoot. It's a fixed lens. It doesn't come off, and I use that for.
It is top of the line.
It's top of the line point and shoot, yeah, but it's a point and shoot, all right. And
people they think of professional camera and they think of a black body.
yeah, big old detachable lens, yeah. And yeah, I can't tell you how many like I said, I encounter a lot of touring photographers in the pit or whatever, and they'll look at me. And I got my age working against me too, but I definitely think it's the gear I'm carrying that people are always looking at me. I've been told so many things by, like, man, I was shooting the show at the Fillmore last summer, and this keys player from Chicago gets in to do a Dr. John tribute with Dumpsta Funk, and I didn't get to talk to him before the show, but I'm shooting for the keys player, not for Dumpsta Funk. Oddly enough, the guy that's not from here, but all the horn section stepped off the podium, which was right behind the keys, and I wanted to get a shot with the whole crowd in the background, so I stood on the little mini stage that the horns were on and shot a photo, and then this guy came up out of nowhere, some touring photographer, I don't know who the hell this guy was, and he walks up, he's like, "You can't do that, you can't step on, that's where the horns come in." And I'm like, dude, I know the song, I know that there's no horns until like another 30 seconds, and it was just annoying. And when I actually shot, when I went in the stairwell after the show and did some portraits and hung out with the keys player, Neil Francis, and he's like, "How was the show for you?" And I said, "Dude, some asshole yelled at me." And he was like, "Screw him, man. Don't worry about that guy. You know the song. He don't. He's just here to make a buck." I think that's important. I really don't even think about the money. Most of the local bands that even hire me now, we don't talk about pay before even. I expect that they'll pay me what is reasonable. And if I have to come tell them something after, like, "Hey, I think I deserve more," then I do, and they're respectful of that. But for the most part, it's just everybody's there to
As long as you enjoy what you do, you never work.
have a good time. That's right. Yeah, I very much resonate with that. It's certainly I enjoy the work, and I think part of the problem with shooting in the New Orleans music scene, like I said, everybody knows everybody. So if I'm shooting for, insert some generic funk band, there's a high chance that 80 people from other bands and whatever will either sit in with them or be hanging backstage. So if they're hanging backstage, that's a lot easier to network, to meet people, and to shoot other gigs. But if they're sitting in with them, then I get 8 photos of the trombone player, and he's got those 8. I'll send them to him as a courtesy, even though he's not in the band that I'm working for, and then he doesn't really need me for another gig. Because also, since everybody knows everybody, it's not that hard for a lot of these local musicians to get gigs, so they don't need that many photos that often. So corporate events definitely pay more, and I do my fair share of those to stay afloat. I want to kill myself when I do them sometimes, but like I shot a 1-year-old's birthday party for $125 an hour a couple weeks ago, and that type of stuff pays a lot more than 8-piece funk bands. But I love doing it, so I don't think I'll stop. I mean, I still pay the bills in Charlotte. There's a lot of bands. They're just mostly a lot of indie pop bands and indie rock bands, and they kind of start to sound monotonous after a while. But like I said, good guys. I enjoy hanging out on the scene. Really, the conversations are a little bit lacking. Like, I made a reference to a while ago. People talk about these obscure John McLaughlin records or whatever from the 70s. And I like that kind of stuff because I love music and I love learning new music. So a lot of the guys in Charlotte don't have the same kind of knowledge of music that they do here in New Orleans, or knowledge and appreciation. So their repertoire of inspiration is pretty mainstream, and I do like the deep cuts that people here in New Orleans have, because it's not pretentious that they like these deep cuts. They just love these deep cuts. I don't really know. Like I said, I really just started shooting because, you know what, I thought I would shoot a lot more sports when I first started, because I shot a lot of sports events for my high school, and I loved doing it. But now that I've started shooting concerts, I can't believe I ever wanted to do that. No shade to sports photographers. That's awesome. But I like music more than I like sports. like sports photography is not that it's spraying and praying, but if the ball's going to the receiver or whatever, you track the receiver and hold it on them, and then brrr. I mean, concert photography, it's like I've got my 200 millimeter locked into the microphone stand waiting for the singer to stick his tongue out or whatever for 5 minutes sometimes. So there's a lot more slowing down and taking it all in. Both of them are waiting for that single moment. Yeah. But it also helps. I think also what makes my job easier than a lot of sports photographers is that since I hang with the musicians before the show and I try and get to know them or whatever, there's also so much playing up to the camera that they make my job easy. I could stay in one spot all night. And some bands that I've worked for a bunch, it's like they rotate to me. If I'm like staying in one spot and having a beer, like the lead guitarist will walk up to me and then he'll move so the bassist can walk up to me, and then the rhythm guitarist, and they'll just ham it up for the camera and move on.
Them all in a row.
I just get them all in a row. Everybody come to me. Yeah, I think there's a lot of corporate bureaucracy going on back there, but I also think that a lot of people get starstruck. I don't really get starstruck. Yeah, everybody's just hanging like nobody cares. You know, that's why a lot of celebrities even moved to New Orleans. My buddies bumped into Robert Plant at Chickie-Wah-Wah a couple weeks ago. I don't even think I told you this, but my buddies bumped into Robert Plant at Chickie-Wah-Wah, and they walked up to him and they were like, "What's up, Rob?" And he was like, "How you doing?" And then, that was it. Then they let him enjoy his night, and he didn't care. I mean, Robert Plant's a 7-foot guy with the most recognizable face on the planet, and nobody bothered him all show. I don't think anybody really cares here. It's just you're another dude. More so than photographers, and then I do have my fair share of photographers, obviously, is the music. I love music, and I think about music. If I'm shooting a band, I always listen to their album on the way there and leading up to it. I'm always listening to the music. As far as photographer inspirations goes, a lot of New Orleans photographers that I'll see old photos from the warehouse or backstage at Tipitina's. There's all sorts of incredible photos of Fats Domino and Dr. John and Alan Toussaint and James Booker. Like, the album cover for Spiders on the Keys, that James Booker record from the Maple Leaf, is great. Stephen Rapport, who lives in New Orleans now, that guy, I mean, we really shoot nothing alike, but you'd be surprised how much I draw from that, even subconsciously. I try not to look at too many photographers' work leading up to shows. Leading up to band portrait shoots, I definitely swipe a few ideas. Not outright.
So when you're about to do a band portrait, you take inspiration from past.
Yeah, I go flip through a Danny Clinch book or something for sure. But more so, it's the music. Like, it really is the music. Like,
Do you let the band's music direct?
I do. Like, I shot for this new band, Milk and the Honeys, which is a sweet band name, and they're sort of like a new age kind of soul funk band. So it's kind of got that R&B in it, but it also a little bit of a more modern R&B production. So, sorry, I'm trying to compare them to someone. That's not even what this is about. So when I'm shooting for this new band, Milk and the Honeys, I remember I took my first photo and I was like, okay, let's stagger. We're at this like trailer park, and I was staggering the guys. There's like the chick's wearing a blue dress. It's a female lead and then 3 guys. And then there's a blue barrel back here, and she's standing in a blue dress. So I'm trying to contrast those two things. I actually ended up throwing it in black and white, oddly enough. But in my mind, all I was thinking was based on, because I was there for a rehearsal, and all I was thinking as I'm listening to them is like, dude, I've just got all these Radiohead and Fish photos going through my head, all these photos of Radiohead and Fish. So as I'm shooting, I'm like, this is going to end up looking like a Danny Clinch Radiohead shoot. And that's exactly what it looked like. Just all those kind of goofy, surreal, they're all standing like this and whatever. Or like, Tom York's just a weirdo. So that type of stuff. So there's definitely, the old adage rings true that definitely if a photo's bad, throw it in black and white and it looks better. That definitely tracks a lot of the times. But I think as a general rule of thumb, I really try to stray away from disingenuousness, and I think so many photographers' style nowadays relies heavily on editing, and it's that if I have the same preset on every one of my photos, it doesn't matter how I'm shooting or what I'm shooting, there's my style. So I really try to stray away from that and edit as little as possible. Like, I consider editing more a la Andy Warhol style, that editing is more so selecting and narrowing down. I think that a lot of modern photographers design their style around how they edit, and insofar as they slap a preset on every photo they shoot, no matter how they shoot it, no matter what they're shooting it of, and call that their style. So I really try and stray away from editing, and back in the 30s, you see a great photograph that Ansel Adams took, and it's like, oh my gosh, how did you capture this moment in time? What a great photo. And now you see a great photo, and it's like, well, it was probably Photoshopped. So I try and steer away from the disingenuousness of relying on post-processing too heavy. So really, when I think of editing now, I think of editing less of adjusting contrast and whatnot, and more of selecting the best photo. So there's that famous photo that Andy Warhol took of Debbie Harry, and everyone's seen it. It's a very simple photo. It's just a tight headshot up against a wall in his studio in New York. But there's a photo that not a lot of people have seen, and it's Andy Warhol and Debbie Harry on a big old, fold-out table, and they've got all the photo's a Polaroid of her, and they've got all these Polaroids from a big old Polaroid big shot that they discontinued in '72, and there's probably 80 photographs of Debbie Harry that all look more or less identical to the one that everyone knows. I mean, it's one of the most famous photos of her. And just the idea fascinated me that of those 80 photographs, Andy Warhol knew that that was the one to publish. And he knew that that was the one. And you just can't help but think, what if he had chosen another one where her face was just a slightly more squinty-eyed or jaw-dropped or whatever? Would it be the Debbie Harry photo that we all know today? So if, especially with digital, you have the luxury of click, 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 click. So I really try and sit with, if I have 10 photos in a sequence of more or less the same thing, and I always shoot single shot. I never spray and pray. I don't ever do the continuous 11 frames a second. I think it's hacky. But I really try and sit with, I shot a photo of this keys player from Chicago, Neil Francis, a couple weeks ago at Tipitina's, and I was shooting with a wide lens, so I was way up in his face. I overstepped my bounds, but I leaned over the keys, because you hardly ever see photos of keys players, especially live photos, where the keys and the guy's head are in the shot, unless you're shooting from the rafters, but then it looks bad. So I really got right up in there on his face and shot it, and I probably fired off 6 or so, and of the 6, I really sat with them for a long time to pick the one that I thought was better than the other, even though there's such minute differences between the 6.
So you're more editing in terms of selecting which pictures to choose instead of editing
and narrowing down. Yeah, exactly. I really try not to touch lighting at all. I think I'm a professional photographer. If I screw up the lighting, shame on me. I'll mostly fix things sometimes I'll fix some shadows. I guess everything's lighting, but temperature, if I'm shooting in the heat of Louisiana and the photo comes out a little bit cooler, because also white balance just screws up sometimes if you leave the white balance on auto or whatever. So any editing I make is to make it more authentic than what I think the camera input itself. Now I shoot all on manual, obviously, but if it's a super hot New Orleans day, I might turn the temperature up slightly, not so that it's orange and saturated, but just make sure people know we're sweating our balls off at this photo shoot.